I was arguing with somebody last night about like whether you can consider an LLM like better than the median. I don't have hard numbers on this, but I'm pretty convinced the AI girlfriend market, the AI boyfriend market is bigger than the AI girlfriend market. Well, LLMs are much better at the complex prompt and they're quite reliable at function calling. And so now you have these building blocks where you can say, I want you, LLM, to have a conversation. If you record an audio waveform of like this conversation, and then you measure the silence period between you talking and then me talking and you talking, it probably is 300, 400 milliseconds most of the time. Humans are very tolerant in human conversation because we have a lot of cues. So it can be longer if we're thinking about our answer, although when we think of our answer, we usually do.
Hey folks, welcome to the new episode of AI Agent podcast series. And today we have Kwindla, who is founder of Daily and Pipecat. And I'm really excited for this one actually. Like one of the persons I really respect in like the voice domain and like a ton of insights always to share. So thanks for coming on board, Kwindla, and looking forward to the pod. Would love for you to introduce like what you do at Daily, Pipecat, and your journey, how you begin and how is it going?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really love talking to you about AI related things. So I'm really happy to get to do it on camera, and I really appreciate you setting this conversation up. I'm Kwindla Hultman Kramer. I'm a co-founder of Daily. We make developer tools and global infrastructure for real-time audio, video, and now AI. We started in 2016. We went through Y Combinator in 2016 and have had a journey since then, as startups do. Roller coaster during COVID as video and audio applications grew. And now lots of new exciting stuff around AI use cases like voice agents for customer support and real-time avatars for social games and video. And our roots are in technology called WebRTC. And so we are very good at routing audio and video packets very fast. And we have SDKs for all the platforms developers would want to build for. And now we've also open sourced lots of the tooling we built for AI use cases, which is the project called Pipecat that you mentioned. Pipecat is the most widely used orchestration framework for real-time AI, for real-time multimodal AI, things like conversational voice. And it's really fun to have such a big open source community working on this stuff around Pipecat.
Makes sense. To give like folks an idea, like I think, can you kind of briefly describe like how many, for example, like stars developers are using Pipecat? If you have some stats, I think just bring on the excitement.
Yeah, I think it's about 3,500 GitHub stars now, which is not as many as your tools, but we're working on it. And I really love your tools, by the way. And I'd love to talk some more about the stuff you're doing. Lots and lots of startups, lots and lots of individual developers building like fashion projects and side projects, but also some really big companies using Pipecat as voice AI starts to get more and more kind of mainstream.
Right, that makes sense. I would love to go deep into like some of the things that you mentioned, like essentially WebRTC. Um, I know Daily does a lot of kind of very cool like latency sensitive stuff there. Would love to know your kind of insights around that. Like what kind of like I personally haven't used WebRTC that much, but I know like using that is kind of painful. Kind of playing around with it. Like I'm from WebSocket kind of era because we deal mostly with text, etc. So would love to know your insights there. What differences are there from WebSockets, for example, how it becomes more complex.
So WebSockets are definitely what most people reach for the first time they build some like conversational AI application, whether it's text or whether it's voice. And so I have a conversation about WebSockets versus WebRTC probably 4 or 5 times a week right now. And what I usually say is WebSockets are great for prototyping, for server-to-server use cases, for hacking on stuff and getting started. But in production for real-time media, where you're trying to send audio at low latency and trying to send audio bidirectionally, especially, you'll end up with lots of challenges that are very hard to address on top of WebSockets. And there are a few reasons for that. The biggest one is WebSockets is a TCP-based protocol. So it's guaranteed packet delivery and guaranteed in-order packet delivery, which is usually what you want for something like structured event data or text. For media that has to be delivered in real time, you actually don't really care about guaranteed delivery.
Yeah.
What you care about is how many of the packets got delivered fast enough that you can play them smoothly. And you really want to drop all the packets that didn't get there in time for you to actually play them smoothly. And TCP does what's called head of line blocking. So every packet has to get there, and then the whole stream stops until you get the packet, and then you get the next packet, and the next packet, and the next packet. So what that means is on network connections that have some packet loss or have like latency spikes, you'll end up with the latency just sort of backing up and backing up and backing up, and you'll end up with, worst case, you'll end up with glitchy audio. More often in a sort of a good operating system like stack, you'll end up with like latency gradually increasing. And you won't, and then you'll end up with disconnects. And you won't see this when you're testing because you have like a good machine and a good network connection because you're an engineer and you get paid to like write code. So you pay attention to that stuff. But as soon as you roll out to large numbers of real world users, especially users on like just random home Wi-Fi or on cellular data connections, you'll have like 20% of your users kind of have a bad experience. And you won't really understand why, because it's very hard to build observability for media streams on top of WebSockets. There's sort of no hooks into the WebSocket layer for understanding whether you had latency issues or whether you had packet loss. And so WebRTC is built on UDP. So there's no head of line blocking issues, has a whole bunch of packet pacing and jitter buffer and audio playout timing management stuff just built in. You never have to worry about it. And then also has all the hooks for like observability, metrics, all the things you need really to understand what's happening with a system in production.
Makes sense. And what extra layer that Daily adds, for example, for the developers to make it much easier to kind of use WebRTC?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great things about WebRTC, but like developer ergonomics may not be one of them. It's a little bit complicated. And you could argue that that complication is sort of irreducible because you've got like lots of real-time media stuff going on in like a fairly complicated state machine under the covers. And it's really, really awesome that like JavaScript has, or browsers have WebRTC like accessible right from the JavaScript layer. So if you really want to, you can totally build WebRTC stuff from scratch in a web browser. But most people, most developer teams, most product teams kind of need an SDK wrapped around the core WebRTC capabilities to kind of build something that goes into production, because like you just don't want to do all that work. Yeah. So Daily has SDKs for the browser, React layer, or React components layer on top of our core JavaScript SDKs, and then SDKs for native mobile like iOS, Android, where you don't really have a native WebRTC environment at all. So our goal is to just make it a few lines of code to drop the SDK into your app and then get a kind of audio and video stream going back and forth and displaying it. The other piece that's hard about WebRTC is infrastructure. So you have to run a specialized server, which in our funny WebRTC world, we call an SFU, a selective forwarding unit. For historical reasons, there's lots of different potential architectures for moving media around the internet. And the one that kind of won out over time was the selective forwarding unit architecture. So almost everybody in production who runs WebRTC infrastructure runs like big clusters of SFUs in lots of regions all around the world. And the idea is that you want to connect users very close on the internet to them. If you've played video games, you thought about ping times. This is exactly the same thing. You're like thinking about like the latency of that first hop. And then additionally, you really want that infrastructure then to route mesh between the SFUs so that you're using like a fast backbone connection and not a slow, long haul public internet connection between any two users, or these days between a user and like an inference cluster. So we run like thousands of servers in like 75 availability zones around the world, split about evenly between AWS and Oracle Cloud. And our goal is to very, 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 very low first hop latency from everywhere in the world, and then very fast, as fast as the speed of light is the goal, although you can't get there, backbone connections between all our clusters.
Got it. Yeah, I think that means like speed is like essentially like when you're speaking, you need speed to be there, right? Then I think I would love to jump to AI side of things, where generally the speed has been a problem, right? Like in like OpenAI released real time API, it's pretty good,
It's really
but like I mean, still not there like in terms of like human to human interaction. Like I think it's like 300 millisecond if I remember correctly, like kind of human time to understanding and replying back. While I think these models some take like anywhere like more than second for sure. So what's your read there? How can we, I mean, generally improve the models or the infrastructure to get some, like get to the human level accuracy and speak?
Yeah, I think you're right. If you record an audio waveform of like this conversation and then you measure the silence period between you talking and then me talking and you talking, it probably is 300, 400 milliseconds most of the time. Humans are very tolerant in human conversation because we have a lot of cues. So it could be longer if we're thinking about our answer. Although when we're thinking about our answer, we usually give some kind of cue that, okay, we got it. We're going to talk, like lots of visual cues, lots of little verbal sidebar cues. Um, the AI latency has been a challenge, but it is getting better. So OpenAI's real-time API in our metrics is about 550 millisecond, including the network round trip time to first byte, which is really good. We're able to get pretty close to that with three model combinations of transcription, LLM, and voice generation. So the fastest three model combinations, like 100 to 150 seconds for the milliseconds for the transcription, 300 to 400 milliseconds for the LLM inference, and then another 150 milliseconds or so for the voice generation. So you're at like 600 milliseconds. So you're pretty close.
Which LLM do you mind, like, is this on?
That's GPT-4o. Like we consistently see 350 milliseconds from GPT-4o with text.
Makes sense.
Some providers, some of the time, are doing really well with Llama 3.1 as well. There's some fast Llama 3.1. What we find, we have metrics for all the providers. What we find is that there's pretty big bell curve of like pretty big spread of latency from most of the providers. OpenAI is actually very good at like a tight, reliable inference most of the time. But AI is so new. I think all the inference providers are both growing rapidly and are figuring out how to like scale effectively. So this infrastructure is less reliable than like the classic cloud. And that's something everybody building in this space is trying to figure out how to manage.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I think very curiously, you mentioned like, I think during COVID times, there was a kind of different type of boom. During AI time, it's a different type of boom, and different type of applications that are coming up. What are the differences that you kind of see between the two phases of like voice and like multimodal becoming like really big? Like I think COVID time was more of live streaming and type of use cases.
Yeah, COVID was a combination of interactive use cases and live streaming, and they both grew a lot. Um, the interactive use cases and the live streaming use cases both took big decline as people went back to the office in real life. I didn't expect that quite as much as it happened, but there were some very durable use cases that have just continued to grow. Telehealth is one of them. Like we saw amazing telehealth growth for obvious reasons during COVID, and we never really saw a decline in telehealth visits. So it was an example, I think, of the pandemic kind of pulling forward a bunch of usage that was going to just stick long term and continue to grow. I think it's an open question what AI use cases are experimental and which ones are going to stick around long term. But I definitely think we can see some of the really big ones that have already kind of made the transition and the inflection point is there. So things like voice and customer service are clearly just going to change kind of the technical landscape for that software stack and that set of use cases. I also personally think we're all just going to talk to LLMs a lot for a whole bunch of different reasons. And mostly what we're trying to figure out is how to build the talking to an LLM technology stack so it's very reliable and very inexpensive, because that combination just unblocks a huge number of use cases.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I'm really curious, what are some of the interesting learnings? You have been in this space like with Daily for like like long time, right? So Pipecat, I think, would have a lot of learnings that you have kind of seen through that journey? That's relatively new, I believe. So, kind of, what are some of the interesting insights that you saw in that journey that you kind of incorporated in Pipecat, and which probably other voice developers should keep in mind?
I, like, for better or worse, have thought a lot over my career about how to build APIs and libraries for other developers to use.
Right.
And I really like low latency, large scale networking stuff. So that kind of intersection is like what I've worked on for my whole career. So when the voice AI stuff became possible, it felt like, oh, this is a new place to apply all these things I really like working on.
Yeah.
And the first versions of what became Pipecat were built just because we wanted to experiment with GPT-4. Like when GPT-4 came out, a bunch of us inside Daily thought, oh, wow, this is a piece of technology that can have a conversation with you. And like, obviously you can have a conversation in text because OpenAI released this great like chat interface. What if we did that for voice? And it really was just a set of experiments initially. And then we started getting some customer pull for it, although it was very unclear like what people actually wanted to do initially, other than a whole lot of friends of ours and friends of friends in San Francisco built themselves some version of like an individual therapist or coach or friend or to-do list manager. And that was actually the very first signal I saw that voice was going to be something that just felt really natural, like voice plus LLMs. It was the individual hackers. It was like just the people like tinkering. Um, and that was part of what convinced us to just open source everything we built internally, because we saw people solving the same few problems over and over just to get something that worked. So phrase endpointing, which is how do you know when the LLM is done talking? Interruption handling, because you definitely don't want the LLM just to keep talking until it's finished. You want to be able to say, okay, wait a second, let me ask you something else. Context management in the context of a multi-turn conversation. I know you've done a bunch of like tool level integrations. You've thought a lot about context management too. Um, piping multiple models together in a very low latency way. So kind of managing the buffers between elements in like what we think of as like a data processing pipeline. And doing that in a way that you could switch out each individual component. Like it's really common to want to like test with both GPT-4 and Llama and Claude. And how do you make that really, really easy without limiting what developers can do or like making it too constrained? So we open source through all the stuff we built for that. And it turned out that kind of then set a foundation, I think, that we could start doing more interesting work on top of. And you actually, we were at a dinner together, we were talking, and you expressed this in a way that was way better than I have. You were talking about like, if you build these building blocks, once you have a certain set of building blocks in place, you can then kind of level up and do the next set of work on top of that. I was really curious to hear you talk more about that and how that looks in the tool integrations world you live in.
Yeah, I think in our case, what we are thinking about is essentially LLMs are keep getting better, right? And so, like the task that you provide, like probably 6 months back or an year back, was like if it was very high level, you would have kind of gotten a lot of failures, and that like kind of the planning and everything has improved. So that's where kind of like the tools also should improve. Like for example, when it's a baby, you want it to probably brush a tooth. So you provide it a brush and toothpaste and like expect it to brush. Like now, I think LLMs have probably grown to a college student or a PhD student, like Open, for example. So now the tools also need to change. The levels of abstractions need to change so that the LLMs can do next level of the task. That's how I think about it, and that's how we are building Composer. We kind of keep upgrading our tools to the next level of like what LLM is capable of right now.
I think one of the examples of that in the voice AI world is what I think we need a better name for it, but I sort of call it script following. So early on, giving an LLM a really complicated prompt was very hit and miss. You give it a simple prompt, you'd have a really fun conversation, but a complicated prompt is really hard. And the second thing that was not reliable enough was function calling. But now LLMs are much better at the complex prompt, and they're quite reliable at function calling. And so now you have these building blocks where you can say, I want you, LLM, to have a conversation where I get answers to these 6 questions. And it doesn't really matter what order you get them in. Like it's going to be a conversation and the human may like take you off track, but always come back and like make sure by the end of the call, if possible, we get answers to these 6 questions. And that now we are starting to build really good abstractions for that make it easy for any programmer who's coming into this space for the first time to kind of script the LLM. But we couldn't do that before because we just didn't have any of either the low level like voice conversation building blocks or the reliability from the LLM.
So that makes sense. I think I can totally imagine like kind of LLMs now actually behaving like an intern, like you giving the order in voice and kind of just they doing the stuff at a decently high level.
I was arguing with somebody last night about like whether you can consider an LLM like better than the median, performer at a particular job. And we listed a bunch of jobs and we're sort of arguing about it. And I really think it is a little bit in the eye of the beholder. And evals are very hard to write for these things. It's sort of too open-ended a question. But my argument was for a pretty surprisingly large number of like knowledge work jobs, LLMs are now like better than the median human performer, which is not really a criticism of humans. It's partly that now we have these really good like function calling and other elements. So you can tie into like backend systems in a way that like we don't have good tooling for humans to do that.
Yeah.
If you call somebody in a customer support call center, often they have to like juggle 6 or 8 different legacy systems to find your account and figure out like how to debug your problem. And the LLM can just kind of directly interface to all of those legacy systems. It's actually kind of a superpower to be able to sit on top of that technology.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I think the next set of questions that I'm about to ask is something that I'm really deeply passionate about. It's around developer experience because we are also a developer too, right? And we kind of try to make a lot of effort to improve the DevX of our users. I would love to know your insights here. Like, I mean, across span of years, like what are some of the things, like some of the kind of bullet points that you, firstly starting with the bullet points and then going a bit deeper on like DevX side that you try to improve both at Daily and Pipecat?
I mean, I sort of always start with, and people I work with are always laugh a little bit because I'm so predictable that anytime we're designing an API, we're trying to make easy things easy and hard things possible. And one of the implications there is define the easy things you want to make easy. Because it's very hard. I think one of the hardest things in API design is to keep the surface area simple and consistent so that people who don't use your API every day can kind of keep that abstraction that you're giving them fully in their head. And there are lots of things that go into that, like writing really good docs, which is its own challenge. But I think like defining what you want the easy things to be and then trying very hard to make easy things easy, but then like there's a creative tension there with making everything else possible. That's what I sort of think of as the job of API design. And it's really fun to try to like resolve that tension, make everything possible, but make the easy things easy. I'm curious how you approach it.
Yeah, I think for us, we try to kind of do like the traditional user story thing, like kind of thinking through for this particular like new functionality that we are adding, how will the user like 90% user, not like 100%, you can't kind of account for that, but would want to use it and kind of writing it down and thinking through like and making that flow, like the first aha moment of that flow very, very simple and easy. That's like, and kind of like in that sense trying to keep a track of how many times he has to open the docs, how many like code lines, like I think we have a thing of like kind of making like less number, like the lesser the code is, the easier it is for the developer to like comprehend it and kind of like getting started, right? So for example, our software engineering agent code was like a simple software engineering agent code was like around 50 to 60 lines of code. And that you're getting a full-blown software engineering agent like Devin working on your laptop or kind of a Docker.
That was super impressive.
Yeah, so that's like our idea. Like, and in every kind of social content also we put in, we keep kind of that as a bar that we need to reduce the number of lines. It doesn't mean like you have to make each line complex. It just means like kind of taking the abstraction as and when needed, like into the SDK.
I do think that they're like 60 to 90 lines of code. There's some kind of limit there for complete but simple demos.
Right.
More than that, it's very hard to say, okay, this is a demo that shows you how to do something simple.
Yep.
And less than that, it's actually hard to build something non-trivial.
Yeah.
It's funny, one of the, we're not always great at writing all the documentation I would like for Pipecat,
Yeah.
but we do have a folder full of examples called Examples Foundational. And it's probably got 60 or so demos in it now. And probably almost all of them are somewhere between 60 and 90 lines of code, I would guess.
Yeah.
And the first thing I did when I built with the OpenAI real-time API, when they released their WebSocket API, was I tried to build a short but complete voice-to-voice client in Python. And it turned out to be 75 lines of code. Now, there's a lot of stuff you would need on top of that in a production application, but I thought that was like I thought they'd done a really nice job with the API to be able to do that. And that's no cheating. That's like all the Python boilerplate, all the imports, all the async IO stuff that you wish were shorter in Python, but it all fit.
Yeah, I think I would love to look at that example, because my example with real-time API went quite a bit longer.
Well, I have written a bunch of these things before, and so I was cheating in a sense. And I think that's actually another thing about API design. One of the tensions, it's probably true in all software, but I think it's even more true when you're building developer tools, is they get better the more you rewrite and iterate on them, the APIs. But you also have to ship to real users in order to learn what you need to do. And you don't want to make breaking changes to real users. So how do you solve that tension where you experiment with like an API structure, you add to it, you iterate, you break it, but you also have real world users? It's like, that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, I think we faced that very early on in the game, where one of our users like literally last week complained about we made a breaking change in the API. And yeah, that was like when they updated it, it was like not working, which was not a great experience, obviously. Yeah, I think we need to get better at it. And yeah, I agree, it's a very big challenge to kind of keep on the like rewriting and refactoring and making it better versus keeping it stable.
I think one of the advantages that Pipecat had was that it was so early. There weren't very many enterprise use cases yet, but we were really excited about it. So depending on how you count, we're probably on version 8 or something of the Pipecat structure or architecture. And it probably didn't really feel like to us, we had the right abstractions until version 5 or 6. But now there's definitely a big enough set of users that we do not want to take the rug out from under people.
Yeah, I totally understand. And sometimes I feel I need to change it, but I'm kind of skeptical about the consequences.
Yeah, time travel would be nice. You go back and tell your feet and previous self, no, that API should actually look like this.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think coming to some sort of business side of things, etc., would love to understand what are the type of applications that both Dailies and Pipecat users are building on top of them, so that the people listening, if they have some similar use cases, they can directly come on.
Well, just because I think startups are often really path dependent, and there's no, one of the reasons it's hard to give advice about startups is startups are so path dependent. In case it's interesting for context, our traditional customers are people who are building things like telehealth applications and job interviews, video calls embedded in a job interview software suite, and teaching and tutoring platforms, and workplace collaboration like video and audio features. We're seeing both our current customers and whole brand new sets of customers come in and start to build voice AI, which is interesting to me. So some of our current customers are building LLM copilots and LLM powered pieces of their already existing video call workflows. And new customers are building lots and lots of telephone based talk to an LLM to solve some problem in a particular vertical industry. The single biggest one is customer support. And I think that's for two reasons. One is the ROI, the return on investment, is very easy to calculate in customer support because you're comparing the cost of running the LLM against the cost of a human agent sitting in front of a piece of call center software, either in a call center or in a like distributed, at home working on the call center queue. So you can say, it costs me 16 cents a minute to employ a person in the Philippines to do this. I can run the voice agent for 14 cents a minute. I should do that. Now, I actually think that the qualitative benefits are very large as well, but those are much harder to budget for and much harder for big companies to make a decision around. So the initial just kind of ROI calculation dominates the transition. The other reason I think customer support is growing fast is because it's a very hard thing for companies to manage anyway. The staffing is very static, whereas what the demand is very variable. So you end up with things like very long wait times. People have trouble hiring enough customer support agents. People have enough trouble training them. So the LLM sort of fills a gap in terms of like scalability. And I've started to think that that's a pattern for AI adoption in general, that some of the early AI agent type use cases are going to be driven by the fact that LLMs are scalable in ways humans aren't. And that's a lens you can look at around AI adoption. Like, where do we wish people were more like auto scalable up and down? And that's a place where we need these new LLMs first.
Got it. So I think uh, what you mentioned are some of the traditional kind of markets, and there are some new emerging markets. I would love to go like deeper on the emerging market side as well, where like what are some of the interesting kind of things that have come up? Like for example, like character.ai. I mean,
Yeah.
AI girlfriend thing, which was like not kind of a previous market thing. It's totally like a new emergent phenomena of this way. Something of that sort that you have seen.
The AI companion sort of first generation market is much bigger than people realize. And in fact, I don't have hard numbers on this, but I'm pretty convinced the AI girlfriend market, the AI boyfriend market is bigger than the AI girlfriend market. Um, it's still, I think, much smaller though than where we're going to be with LLM like social companions in the future, because I think the first generation is very much a first generation of this tech, and it doesn't feel as immersive or collaborative or social or functional or flexible as like we are going to get over the next couple of years. So I really do expect to see just an explosion of like agents, companions, friends, helpers in kind of all our social software and all our productivity software. And I think we're going to have assistants that feel a lot more human, a lot faster than we expect. And we're going to have to figure out what that means. I think it'll require software UIs to get totally updated, for example. If you need LLMs to drive your UIs should probably look very different, but that'll take a little while to come true. I also think 2025 is going to be the year of real-time video. There's so much interesting work going on with AI avatars.
Thanks.
And it's hard to figure out exactly where those economically, valuable use cases are as well. But the technology is going to give us room to figure it out.
Makes sense. So anything that you guys are doing with the real-time video, like any other mode, like other than kind of voice?
Yeah. So, I mean, we built our infrastructure to support video from the very beginning. So we're just sort of waiting for real-time video to get good enough that lots and lots of people want to use it. We work with a bunch of the startups that are doing really great real-time video models as the network layer that they build their tooling and their products on top of.
Got it. That sounds pretty interesting. And like because I'm kind of from the agent and tool world, what are type of assistant use cases that you are seeing like kind of some like success on in like voice? Because I would love to see an Alexa actually doing like a worthwhile task for me, where I'm not kind of thinking about it going wrong, etc., which was true for the older generation of Alexas and Siris. So what are some of the interesting things there?
I'll tell you a couple of stories because I don't think anybody's gotten the sort of full stack for long running voice assistant, hyper personalized, long running voice assistant right yet. And I think it's a whole startup's worth of effort. But I expect to see it for a couple of things that really sort of changed my thinking a little bit. we deployed a bunch of medical transcription and medical like software voice integration and stuff with the customer earlier this year. And when I went on site to sort of talk to those customers to kind of learn what worked and what didn't, one of the doctors told us that every day on the way to work, he called the new AI medical assistant and talked to her about its patient. And we totally didn't intend that as a use case.
Interesting.
Because we had wired up these pieces and we hadn't really firewalled them up because it was a very small rollout with people who knew exactly what they were doing. And, we were worried about patient data, but we weren't really worried about like how the doctors were using it, right? Like they'd all been trained. They all knew exactly what was going on with the LLMs. So there was access to sort of the patient records in the EHR via secure sort of telephone numbers and other little bits of things that were wired together. And that was enough for this doctor who loved what he did. He loved like working with patients to like prep for his day by calling and talking to a new LLM medical, like almost like a friend in medical school or a colleague, but it was an LLM. And it's like, wow. So this is unlocked by this long conversational voice modality. And he can just sort of have this super flexible conversation, and function calls get him the data that he was talking about into the LLM context. So the LLM can like answer questions and have like a good conversation with them. And that really opened my mind up to what these things can look like. And then the other sort of funny action a couple months ago was I was testing some Pipecat vision code, and I had my iPhone camera pointed at my computer screen, and I have a bunch of Python code on the screen, and I said something, and the LLM identified like the structure of the code just organically based on whatever I randomly said. Oh, this screen capture, this image is actually due with. And I triggered it with my voice. So I wrote a little macOS thing to look at a couple of windows all the time,
Right.
and have a voice channel open all the time. And then ping Claude whenever I ask a question. And I stopped having to copy and paste into Claude when I had a Python question, or just ask. And the vision, the images would automatically go in, vision inference would run, my voice was the prompt, and I would get text back out. This is like a totally different work. Much bigger step function in how I would work than I would have expected.
That makes sense. I think, these kind of so many times a day, we do that generally, like going to Claude or about code. I think if we save like minutes of time there, I think it adds up to kind of a lot. So totally.
And I can sort of imagine wiring up a lot of tools there.
Right.
And then it just becomes kind of much more organic
and powerful.
But I don't quite know what that looks like. Like, I don't quite know what the right APIs are for that. I mean, you know better than I do pieces of that. And I don't quite know what that becomes. Because you don't always want to talk. You also want to type. Like, just a whole bunch of UI that it's going to take a bunch of work to figure out. Almost, it reminds me a little bit of early days of mobile. Like the first mobile apps looked like bad desktop apps and bad websites.
Yeah, makes sense. I think like the interfaces have to change. I think it's just matter of like time and kind of user insights to drive them to the right position. Yeah. Coming to like future, what are some of the exciting things that are kind of coming up with Daily and Pipecat? What the users should be excited for? New features.
So I'm really excited about what has kind of come into focus as the medium long-term trajectory of Pipecat pretty recently. So we started with this server-side orchestration framework. So some Python code is running in the cloud somewhere, and it performs this kind of voice-to-voice, multimodal, video, vision, agentic loop. And you're moving audio and video to and from a client device or a telephone to this voice agent running in the cloud. And that took a while to get right. That was the sort of foundational building blocks you were talking about. What became really clear once we had a pretty big community of people building these like server-side bots was there was still a lot of work to do on the client side to get that right. Like
the agents you get back from an LLM and a TTS system, the way you drive that conversation, the way you manipulate the context periodically, the way you save stuff to persistent storage, that all needs to be triggered by like a rich SDK on the client side. So a couple months ago, we built client SDKs for Pipecat specifically for these multimodal agents that need to be real time. And now those are starting to get used and people are starting to like iterate and improve the client side APIs.
Yeah.
That feels really powerful. And now that we've got that, we have a bunch of people building like hybrid local and cloud model stuff. So some stuff is running on your local device, some stuff is running in the cloud, but we don't have good abstractions for that. So we've got the good server abstractions, we've got the good client abstractions driving the server, but then now there's this hybrid thing we don't have good abstractions for. So I'm excited about building like that third wave of Pipecat abstraction.
Yeah, I think sounds very, very interesting and fun. Yeah. Any advice? I think a lot of agent startup founders and builders would be listening. So any advice that you have, like it can be like on the AI front, on the tech front, on the business front, any, very open.
We say I try not to give advice. Giving advice is so dangerous. I would say though, if you're excited about a startup, find something you think you'll be excited to work on for 10 years. Because startups take a long time to like really, really become something. And I've sort of accidentally done that a couple times in my career at a previous startup that took like 8 or 9 years. And then at Daily, which we've now been working on since 2016. So I think if you're super excited about something for a long time, like that takes you through the various startup roller coaster challenges in a way that nothing else can.
Makes sense. I think kind of valuable. Like if you have fun while doing the job, then only you'll do a good job.
Yeah. And nothing is fun all the time, every day, in every way. But something's fun enough that you like doing the pieces that aren't necessarily fun to other people. That helps a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And now I think I have a general like surprise question, which is like very, very philosophical and kind of crystal ball type question. Like things are changing very, very fast, right? Like last 2 years, the progress that AI has kind of made is probably I think shadowing last decade or so. And like I don't know if you saw like Anthropic's founder like had this kind of I'm forgetting the title of the article, but like really good article around it. How we see the future once AGI is here, etc. How do you see the future in next 5 years? How things will play out? Like I think there's no certainty in this world, but some of the things that.
Well, I have sort of two things I try to keep in my head at one time about that. One is that it doesn't seem like AI progress is slowing down to me. It seems like things are continuing to change at an incredible pace. And that's interesting. And that definitely influences how I think about things that we should work on commercially at Daily. I think the piece of that people talk about a lot is if you're building a wrapper for LLMs and the LLMs get better, does your wrapper get better? Wrapper's not the right word, but does your product get better when the models get better, or does it get obsoleted when the models get better?
Yeah.
That's something I think is really important to think about. If you have salaries, you have to make sure you're able to pay every month, for example. And so I do think the models continue to get better. That's both really exciting from an engineering perspective and really important to think about from a business perspective. And the other thing, though, that I think is interesting is if we just stopped all progress today in AI and just took the tools we have today, it still feels like we have 10 years of work to make the most out of those tools. Like we just start and scratch the surface. I was thinking that today because Anthropic posted a single file amalgamation of their documentation that was designed to be used in an LLM context for, help with like documentation of APIs. And I was thinking, I've been meaning to do that for all Daily stocks for like 5 or 6 months and just never got around to it. And there's probably a billion things like that, right? We're just not even beginning to use the capability of these new tools.
Right.
I mean, we argue about when AGI is going to be here, but I think we have a weak version of AGI here today if we use these tools that are proposed.
Makes total sense. Yeah, I think that.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree on like the starting part of it for sure. Like I also believe like the the scale of kind of development, the pace of development is just gonna get faster. I don't see it getting slower for sure. And like thinking about the future, like how the product fits in the future AI world is very, very important. And that's what we are trying to do. Like we were kind of early with Composio. Like we started like what, like around January when like agent was not a like common word for sure. And we were building for agents. So in that sense, we were early. But right now we feel like I hope we don't at some point get behind the curve. Like, so that's where kind of keeping up the pace, like building stuff which kind of internally feels like killing your company. You have to do it. You have to rewrite, thinking about like what the next generation of model will do, etc., etc. So yeah, I think thinking about it every kind of single day in that sense right now is the only way to survive.
My experience at startup, did you always feel like you're either too early or too late? There's never any like, you're always either too early or too late.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, I think where can the listeners find you and Daily and like
Yeah. Well, Daily is daily.co and Pipecat is pipecat.ai. And I'm Kwindla on Twitter.
yeah, that's the easiest to find. Awesome. It was a great podcast. Thanks for being here. And yeah, we'll have all the links, by the way, in the description so folks can just reach.
Thank you so much.